Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining me in this next session at Library 20.013. My name is I just want to take a moment to give a shout out to our sponsors and supporters and thanking them for allowing this amazing event to happen, and a special thanks to all the moderators and support people who have been helping us presenters. I know of the work they do, and they're doing a spectacular job and holding it all together. So what I want to do real quick before we get started here, I've turned on the whiteboard. If you could go ahead and select the star icon from the toolbar there and kind of place a star on the map. Let me know where you are. The last session I did, I had folks from Hungary and New Zealand. It looks like we've got looks like the Caribbean there, Canada, the United States. Great. So thank you very much for that. And we're going to go ahead and move on and get right into my slides here. So what I want to do with this session is talk to you kind of about where eBooks and e-readers have come from and move a little bit towards the end into the future. So this is going to be basically a timeline that we're going to be looking at and filling you in, because I found in a lot of the e-reader workshops that I have done, a lot of people don't realize that eBooks and e-readers have been around as long as they have, and what sort of technology changes have happened along with that. To start with, I wanted to say one other thing about myself. I like to describe myself as an ebook curmudgeon. I have an e-reader. I've had several e-readers. I teach e-readers as part of my job, but it's probably a little hard to tell, but if you look over my right shoulder here, there are shelves full of physical books. I am a book collector. I was a bookseller before I became a librarian, so I personally kind of have this love-hate relationship with electronic books. But pretty much every single platform and piece of technology that I'm going to talk about until we get to that future stuff, I have actually used, if not actually owned. So with that, let's go ahead and dive right in. And to get started, I'm going to go back to 1971. So I can say that I am older than what we would call an ebook, but not by much, to be completely honest. And with Project Gutenberg. Many of you have probably heard of Project Gutenberg. It is still around, it's still going strong, but it did start back in 1971 with the U.S. Constitution typed into a mainframe computer. And these days, it now has over 40,000 free non-DRM or digital rights management laced content in multiple formats, and is a great place for a lot of free content for that. So we're going back all the way just over 42 years here to get started. And to be honest, after 1971, a lot really didn't happen in the world of ebooks. But what we're going to do, so we'll jump up here to 1988. And if anybody recognizes this gentleman, go ahead and type his name into the chat there. But he started a company called Next Computer. And it's Steve Jobs. And it's Steve Jobs during the time when he wasn't at Apple. He started two companies, Next Computer and another little company called Pixar. I'm not sure what happened to that one. But anyways, Next Computer, what he did was, it was the first desktop computer to include searchable ebooks, or ebooks as we would think of them today. It included the Oxford Shakespeare and the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations. Now, the Next Computer wasn't very popular, didn't sell a lot, probably most of you haven't even heard of it. The only side note I'll say from kind of the geek history point of view is the first World Wide Web server was actually on a Next Computer. But there we have Steve Jobs kind of being a little future forward thinking and thinking, hey, you know, maybe these electronic texts or ebooks might be something that we would want to get into and get going on. So he started that. The next year, in 1989, Ben Bova, a science fiction author, published a book called Cyberbooks. And I throw this in here, if nothing else, because he was kind of future-looking, and it's a book that predicts what would happen to publishing if books became electronic. And it's really kind of creepily accurate, although it did predict the end of publishing as we know it. I wouldn't say we've gotten there yet. If you look in the picture, the gentleman is holding kind of this device here. It's really interesting. It was kind of the size of an Apple Newton, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. You would actually get books on a cartridge. You would put the cartridge into a slot. I mean, it's working on the technology of 1989, but if you can find it, unfortunately, it's out of print. It is a very interesting read, especially if you're really interested in the history of ebooks and e-readers. I'll also say my personal copy of this book is autographed. Yeah, do that to a Kindle. So, speaking of the Apple Newton, this is our next thing. So we jump from 1989 to 1993. The Apple Newton, obviously not a big seller. They only made it up until 1998. Someone, Anika in the chat here, says she had a Newton. Most people have pretty fond memories of it, but I would say it was a little bit ahead of its time. You could write on the screen. It had the stylus. It was first what we would call a personal digital assistant, but it did come with something called Newton Books. Anika, you still have it. Does it work? That would be a very good question. Newton Books, it had content that you could get onto it and use as a reader. Now, I will say I've not ever actually read a book on a Newton, but based on the display technology, which is one of the technologies we're going to kind of follow through as we go through here, not quite designed to be really good for reading long-form content. Something I do actually have two of in my office at work is the Franklin Rocket ebook. This came out in 1998. The first device, I would say, that would be considered a dedicated e-reading device. That's pretty much all it did. It weighed about 1.3 pounds, little bigger, kind of a really thick paperback, stored about 4,000 pages of content. It did have some speech quality audio available to it, ran about $370. It also came with an exclusive Stephen King novella called Writing the Bullet with it. When this first came out, that was the only way you could get that story from Stephen King. It had a charging cradle. It had this nice leatherette storage pouch you would have that you could see there. It was a touch screen with a stylus device. It worked. It was a pretty darn good device. Long battery life for the time, 17 to 33 hours, a monochrome LCD display. Nowadays, ours still actually do turn on, but unfortunately they don't hold a charge. So in order to actually read a book on this one, that I would have to leave it plugged in. And Margaret's saying here, looks like early PDAs. Yeah, it was pretty much the same display technology as that Apple Newton. And yeah, 33 hours is great now, Brock, but we'll see battery life is kind of that other technology we're going to track as we go through this. So in 1998 was also released the SoftBook e-reader. This was a larger screen, 9.5 inch screen. But also notice here in bold I have here that it actually included a 33.6 kilobit per second modem. So it's one of the first devices where instead of plugging it into a computer, you could actually connect it to a phone line and download content there, and you would actually have kind of a content package that you would get. This one, I've never actually had my hands on one of these, but I think it's kind of that you can see the early technology of the things we're talking about. And again, a monochrome LCD-based screen. Now, getting away from the hardware a little bit, the next thing that happened in 2000 was the release of the Microsoft Reader. And the Reader actually was just suspended back in 2012, so just a little over a year ago at this point. And it was software-based e-reading as opposed to hardware-based. So they improved kind of some what was called clear type technology for fonts. It had the annotation features, pan and zoom, highlighting dictionary, but this was something you definitely installed on a desktop computer or a laptop computer. But it did also come with a store, the Microsoft Reader store. I did actually have, I purchased a couple of books this way. I can remember some exclusives that I bought because it was the only way that content was available. And like with most everything else we'll talk about, had DRM on it, so if you don't have the software anymore, short of doing something that would be considered illegal, you can't read that content anymore. So it's definitely something to think about. Also coming along here in 2002 was the Palm Trēo. Now this was my first smartphone. I did have a regular old dumb cell phone before this, but the Palm Trēo was kind of the merging of PDAs and cell phones. Somebody used those in 7th grade. Now you're dating yourself. In this case, you could download that content over the air, so you had the ability to use the cellular network to get your content onto it. This is almost an app-based environment. Now we'll get to apps when we get to the iPod Touch and the iPhone, but you could install programs to this device, and one of them was the MobiPocket Reader software. Now MobiPocket is still around. In fact, the Mobi ebook format is actually the basis for the Kindle format books. So that software, that format's been around since about 2002. So in this case now you're talking about being able to read books on a cell phone. Now here in the States, I can't speak about many other countries, but reading on a cell phone is really not that big of a deal. Most people don't do it. Now you go to places like Japan, reading books on cell phones is a really big deal, and authors even write content specifically designed and specifically released knowing it's going to be read on such a small form factor device. Also in 2002 is where things get really interesting in the laptop world. And Brock's saying in India a lot of people read on cell phones too. Thanks for that. That's great information. Now these days when we think tablet, we think iPad. Okay. This is what a tablet was before the iPad. I had two models of this kind of computer. I still have one. It still works, although it's heavy compared to most computers today, so don't carry it around as much anymore. But the idea here was, in this case, you could open up the laptop, and then as you can see on the screen, kind of swivel the screen 180 degrees and then close it back down again. And then you would have a stylus where you could write on the screen. Well, in combination with the Microsoft Reader software that I mentioned a few slides ago, these are actually promoted as e-readers. Because the other thing you could do with this screen is once it was closed up, you could change from landscape to portrait mode with your laptop and read it more like the page of a book. Okay? Now, just imagine reading a book on a 4-pound laptop sitting on your chest in bed. Okay? Not exactly practical. But these were partially marketed as e-readers. And so, you know, I throw it in here to kind of fill that gap, that combination of hardware and software before really all things start to change. And when all things start to change is in 2004. This is the Sony Libre. And the Sony Libre was released by Sony in Japan only. This was not available in other countries that I'm aware of. It definitely was not released in the United States. It ran off of a couple of AAA batteries, and it was the first device to use a new display technology called e-ink. Okay. So what I want to do here is just briefly, for one slide, talk about what e-ink is. All of the other devices we've talked prior to this used basically an LCD display technology. Okay? And most things like your iPad, your cell phones today are still going to be an LCD display. But the Sony Libre, now your Nook Simple Touch, the Kindle Touch, all the Sony readers today are using what's called e-ink. Now, e-inks actually came out well before 2004, but 2004 is when it hit the e-reader world. And the idea of e-ink overcame a significant problem of the combination of LCD display and battery technologies. LCD, when it is on, it is using power. Okay? So if your iPad screen is turned on, even if you're not doing anything, it's using power. This is why, after a couple minutes, it turns itself off to save that battery life. E-ink works off of a very simple technology that is, this is as simple as I can get it. Think of each pixel as a ball that is ink on one side, black on one side, and no ink, clear on the other side. And depending on whether or not that ball is positively or negatively charged, either the light side or the dark side is up towards the screen. Okay? So when you change the screen, it decharges and recharges the appropriate pixels so that you now have black pixels where you need them and white pixels where you don't. Here's the key. E-ink, for all intents and purposes, only uses power when it's recharging the screen. So if you have an e-ink based device, it charges the screen, gets the display the way it needs to be, then it stops using power. So you can have something on the screen without power being used. Okay? For example, my watch, which is going to be a little upside down here probably for you, it's pretty much impossible to see, sorry about that, uses a similar technology called e-paper. And so the idea is that when the time changes, it uses a tiny bit of power, but then when it's displaying but not changing, it doesn't use any power. And Julianne's commenting her Kobo e-ink device lasts about 2 weeks between charges. This is why. Because you can put a smaller battery in it, but the device lasts that much longer because of how and when it uses power. Okay. Now, e-ink technology has improved and changed over time. We'll talk about that as we go on, but that's basically how why e-ink was used and how that kind of kick-started the whole e-readers as we know them today. So the first one released in the United States was in September 2006, the Sony PRS-500. I actually have one of these. Got one for Valentine's Day 2007, if that tells you anything about my life. And it was the e-ink display, 4 levels of grayscale. Now, when I was describing how e-ink worked as a concept, I basically said it's either on or off. Well, it's actually a little more complicated in that you actually have 4 levels of grayscale and off. Now, levels of grayscale don't generally matter when you're dealing with text, because text is generally black or white, but when you start dealing with images, the more levels of grayscale you have, the more detail you can have in an image. So that's definitely important. Had USB data transfer, approximately 7,500 page turns per charge. So we're now kind of measuring in weeks, and weighed just 9 ounces. Like I said, I still have one, still works. It's a little slow. The page turns take a little longer than newer devices, but it's still completely functional. Now, when the Sony Reader came out in the United States, Sony decided that they need to create a marketing campaign for this. And so this is an actual subway billboard that I saw. I think it was in D.C. Someone else took this particular photo. And yes, sexier than a librarian. Now, have you ever heard the don't upset the librarians. They're being quiet because they're planning on plotting the world or taking over the world. Okay. Well, librarians saw this, and we have a gasp and a hee-hee and a lies and a definitely here. Well, see, that definitely is perfect because librarians complained, and they did actually update their marketing campaign. And so this is version 2. So instead of sexier than a librarian, they added, your librarian may vary. Now, that being said, definitely here in the U.S., the Sony readers are not the most popular devices in the world. They're a little pricey. Obviously, the Nook and the Kindle are much more popular. But I got to say, I did enjoy the marketing campaign and their response to our complaints. All right, so as you've noticed, we've started adding months to the dates here. So things start happening a lot faster and a lot quicker in the last 5 years or so. So June 2007, the iPod Touch and the iPhone come out. So Steve Jobs' triumphant return to Apple. The iPod Touch and the iPhone come out. Not explicitly marketed as e-readers, but they did introduce us to what we would call now an app-based environment. Even though we did have that on the Palm, it wasn't nearly what the technology is today. And in this case, all you needed to do was download an app that was e-reader software, and you can do that. Now, not all of those, such as the Kindle or the Barnes & Noble, were available right up front, but they are available now for these devices. And now these are full-color LCD displays, but you can tell just by the size, battery life is getting better. So we have kind of this back and forth between e-ink making batteries last longer, but newer batteries lasting longer, so we can have devices with LCD screens that do last a reasonable amount of time between recharges, usually at least about a day or so. In December 2007, the Sony PRS-505, the second generation Sony e-ink device, came out. Basically, the only real significance to this particular device, as you can see here, it says 8 levels of grayscale. So e-ink, with the release of the Sony 505 in December of 2007, e-ink has progressed so that they've doubled the levels of grayscale. Beyond that, not too much significance. Between here and the next Sony that I'll mention near the end, Sony put out a lot of different models. I want to just mention that I'm not going to talk about every single model of every e-reader that has come out. It would be a full day presentation. I'm just trying to hit kind of the highlights and the things that really move the technology along. Now, I want you to think about this. What device have I not yet mentioned in this presentation? I've been talking for 20 minutes about e-readers, and I haven't mentioned something, and Helena's got it, the Kindle. Exactly. The Kindle hasn't happened yet. The Kindle doesn't happen until after the Sony comes out, but also in December of 2007. And this is a picture here of Jeff Bezos holding the first generation Kindle on the cover of Newsweek. And I've bolded there the QWERTY keyboard, but if you remember back to the Sony Libre, even though it wasn't in English, it did have a keyboard on it. So even the Kindle was not the first one to have a keyboard. But considering that most people in the U.S., the Sonys, which didn't have keyboards, were the only other option at the time, this was a big deal. Also, they had what they called their WhisperNet. And I have there on the slide in parentheses EVDO. EVDO is a cellular technology. These days, we would say 3G or 4G. EVDO, to kind of simplify it, would be the equivalent of 2G in there. But the idea is that with the Sonys, you had to connect a cable to a computer. In this case, they built the store in. You didn't even need Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi wasn't even supported on the original Kindle. But in this case, you would connect to the AT&T cellular network over what they called WhisperNet and download your content that way. And I got to say, that was kind of a stroke of genius from Bezos's point of view. Not much happened in 2008, so we're going to jump to February 2009. The Kindle 2 comes out, and this one's a little more designed like we're more used to. They added Wi-Fi. They added the text-to-speech option, which, again, if you go back to something like the Rocket eBook, is not new, but is useful. And also, the e-ink here has doubled yet again to 16 levels of grayscale. And this is what's known as e-ink Pearl. And this is pretty much the state of e-ink as it stands today, with a notable exception that we'll get to at the end. Okay, so we've done the Sonys. We've talked about the Kindles. Somebody mentioned when I asked, Allie said I hadn't mentioned Nooks yet. Well, here's finally the Nook. November 2009, the Barnes & Noble Nook is released. Now, this one's really interesting because at the top, the display where you read content, where you read your books, is e-ink. However, the bottom kind of 1/5 of the display was a touchscreen color LCD. So you would touch screen down in the LCD part to control things, but you would view what you wanted to read or look at up in the e-ink part. So they were trying to get a little bit of like a kind of best of both worlds. Personally, I was unimpressed. I have used one, and people who use them regularly said they, you did get used to it eventually. This was also the first e-reader that ran the Android operating system. It was Android version 1.5. We're now up to 4 point something. That will become kind of important in a couple of slides. And Barnes & Noble also introduced a loaning feature. So, for example, if you and your mother both own Nooks, you could loan a book to her once for 2 weeks and while she had it, you couldn't read it. Kind of like a real-world sort of scenario there. And that hasn't caught up as much on some of the other platforms, but it is something I do believe that Barnes & Noble still does offer as part of their platform. All right, excuse me, I need a drink. April 2010, the Apple iPad is released. Now, you've got the larger form factor. You've got, obviously, much better battery life because you have a kind of a larger full-screen LCD color touchscreen display, so that battery life really had to kick in. And depending on your wireless use, about 9 hours of life on the original version. But the key here when it comes to the ebook and e-reader world is that the iBooks app from Apple was actually included. And included so well that they recently lost a class action lawsuit or a federal suit over price fixing. But this is where Apple really gets into it and says, we're going to promote this as an e-reader. Yes, you can play Angry Birds. Yes, you can check your email and surf the web, but you can also use this as a reading device. In November 2010, the Barnes & Noble Nook Color came out. This is the device I have and use on a daily basis, but I've done something to it that I'll get to in just a second there. And Allie says, there's my baby. All right. This was Barnes & Noble's attempt to compete with the iPad, kind of more of a 7-inch screen, more rectangular than square, and with also running the Android operating system. But as Allie has mentioned in the chat, and as my last bullet point there mentioned, it was what's known as rootable. Okay, so what does that mean for those who don't know? When it comes to, say, the Apple devices, it's called jailbreaking, where you break into the operating system to allow you to do things that the manufacturer said or doesn't necessarily want you to do. Well, because the Barnes & Noble Nook Color ran Android, and Android was an open source operating system, people were able to figure out how to gain root access to the OS. And once you do that, you can change the OS. So as it sounds like Allie has done, and I definitely have done, I have gone in and erased the original operating system that came with it and installed a different operating system called CyanogenMod, or CM for short. And now I can treat it as a full-blown Android tablet. I can install any software I want on it. I can put any content I want on it. I am not reliant on Barnes & Noble saying I'm allowed to do something with that device. Now, that is perfectly legal. It's okay, but it's also kind of tricky. If you don't follow the directions exactly, you do end up with a doorstop. But you do instantly violate your warranty. So just kind of a heads up there. If you can find one of these cheap, you can turn it into quite a useful device or an extra useful device. And yes, Elena, it can be an expensive doorstop. But so far, I'm 4 for 4. I've rooted 4 of them, and so far, no bricks, no doorstops. So far, so good there. Okay. So in June 2011, the Nook Simple Touch came out. So still Barnes & Noble, and in this case, they're saying, hey, you know what? We've got these LCD things. Maybe we want to put out an e-ink device. So this is going to be a touchscreen e-ink device. And I saw somebody a little back in the chat room say that they prefer e-ink for reading over LCD. Let me talk about that for just a moment. Another difference between e-ink and LCD is the emission of light. LCD screens emit light. This is why you can read them in the dark. E-ink devices do not emit light, which means you're going to need an external light source. And we'll see as we get to some newer devices that they've started to build that in. And there have been scientific studies over eye strain and your ability to get to sleep being a little more significant when it comes to LCD and not so much when it comes to e-ink. Julianne's also commenting that she likes to read in the sun. Yeah, the iPad turns into a giant mirror because it's glass, whereas most e-ink displays are more of a matte plastic. So, you know, they can be able to more easily read in sunny situations as opposed to needing that external light source. This is kind of our first e-ink touchscreen display, which is the reason I've pulled it in here. So, Helena, is Nook available only in the U.S.? I don't know that for sure. If you have Barnes & Noble stores, you should be able to get the Nook there, but if you don't, then you don't. And we have Kobo in Canada. I would say, yeah, I am aware that Kobo is very big in Canada, and I think that's because you don't have Barnes & Noble, as you're telling me in the chat room, so thank you for that. Kobo is available here in the United States, but it's really not that popular, where it is definitely a popular device in Canada. Okay, so next device, October 2011, the Sony Reader Wi-Fi. Now, this is the one other Sony that I'm going to talk about, and I find this device very interesting. We have one of these at the office. I've used it. It's great, but for some very specific features. Starting from this one and coming forward, you no longer have to connect Sony's to a computer. Prior to this one, every one of them had to be connected via a USB cable. This one built in the Wi-Fi. But the key here is that last bullet point on my slide, built-in overdrive support. The Sony Reader Wi-Fi, so this is the first one, there's a second generation, I think a third generation just came out recently, has a public library button on the screen. And so if somebody has one of these, they have Wi-Fi connectivity, and their local library uses Overdrive, they can log into Overdrive, check out a book, and download it to their device without having to connect it to another computer, yet still be an e-ink device. So yes, I know you can do all this on your iPads and your Nooks and things like that through the apps, but this is actually built into the system and e-ink. So it is an interesting device. It's a little pricey. It usually runs about $150, but in classes, when I talk to librarians, when patrons is which device should I buy, and there's lots of questions you can ask them. But if you've got that patron who just wants to read, would prefer e-ink, and doesn't have their own computer, as long as they have some Wi-Fi somewhere, this may be the device you would want to recommend to them. Okay? And yes, Natalie, that would be why Overdrive gave you one when you signed up. Exactly. In fact, I think that's how we got ours at the office also. Okay, so moving on. November 2011, Kindle Touch comes out. So this is Amazon's competitor to the Nook Simple Touch, getting into the e-ink based devices again, touch screen in this case. I throw this one in here because this is the first one I know of that was available with or without advertising. Most Amazon devices now have that option where I think you can pay something like $10 or $15 extra to get the ads turned off. Okay. How's that for marketing? All right, so November 2011, the Kindle Fire comes out. This is now Kindle's response to the Nook Color, and now the Nook Color HDs and the Nook tablets and things like that. The second one is coming out shortly, the HDX. Unfortunately, Helena is saying they are not available in Canada. But they are, the way I like to describe the Kindle Fire is an Amazon delivery system. If you want to get everything from Amazon, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, the Kindle Fire is a spectacular device. If you want to get your apps from them, and your books from them, and your games from them, and your movies from them, and your television from them, wonderful, wonderful device. You want to get content from somewhere else, not going to be as easy. But I will say it is a very slick device. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to start getting into kind of the things you may not be familiar with. We're going to kind of go back and forth and lead into the future here just a little bit. But we still got to get through 2012 to do that. And then I'll completely open it up for questions if you have any. Quick question here. Pamela's asking, can you root the Kindle Fire? I don't know, and Allie's saying no. I don't recall reading anybody saying they had done it, but I don't recall reading anybody saying that you can't. And Allie's saying nope. So I'm going to lean towards no on that one. And the Kindle Fire does look like is available in Australia. Great. Okay, so what's next? Something you probably never heard of, the Octaco JetBook. Okay. I have never actually seen one of these in real life. Its market is pretty much to like U.S. federal government employees who travel around the world. Yeah, and Octaco is a spectacular name. That's the company name. But this is a color e-ink device. Everything I've talked about up until this point e-ink has been grayscale. Color e-ink does exist. It is available in this device, and pretty much only this device for right now, and it runs about $500. I would love to play with one of these. You get the battery life of an e-ink, but you get the full color. Notice about 10,000 page turns on a charge. Yeah, Ellie says, I wanted one until you mentioned the price. Exactly. I mean, this is not an inexpensive device. But notice also, like I said, for foreign travelers, speech recognition, there we go, I got a typo in my slides, dictionaries, things like that. And Danny, yeah, it runs about $500 last I checked. So not, you know, yeah, as a consumer you can buy one, but it really isn't marketed to consumers. In April of 2012, the Nook Glow Light came out. Kindle now has something like this. Basically what they've done here is, since e-ink doesn't emit light, you need a light source to read it. So the way these built-in light source e-ink devices work is kind of, the light comes in from around the bezel. So it's not, the light is shining in from the top and the bottom and the sides. And I know plenty of people who have these and they really like them. I tend to not read in the dark. I tend to have a good light source above me or next to me. But if you're one of those people who likes to sit up late in bed at night and your spouse or partner has gone to sleep, this could be the sort of device for you. Okay, so now let's get into some of these things that are kind of, they're there, but a little more out from even the Octaco. So I've got just a couple more slides to show you here. This is the WEXLER Flex One. And this is using, as I mentioned, as my watch uses a little earlier, what's called the electronic paper display, or e-paper. It's very similar to e-ink. And for the purposes of this presentation, you pretty much say it's the same as e-ink. But it says here flexible. Now, I don't mean that the e-reader is flexible. If you look at the picture there, you can see that the e-reader is curved a little bit, but it's still in a hard plastic shell. So this is not the device itself is not flexible. The key here is that the display material is flexible. Okay, so if you think about your Nook Simple Touch or your Kindle or any other e-ink device you've ever held, okay, if you were to dismantle it, the display piece of it would be hard and rigid. If you dismantle this device, the display material would be flexible. Now, why do we care? Well, the simplest reason to care is if it's flexible, it can be thinner and it's lighter. Hard and rigid, heavier, thicker, flexible, thinner and lighter. Okay? And it won't as easily break, as Margaret says in the chat. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, I still wouldn't hit it with a hammer, but less likely to break. Okay? Flexible displays are really coming. Okay? It's starting to happen. If you just think about newer TVs and how thin they're getting, okay? Just wait. I'm going to blow your mind in about 30 seconds here. Quick story, though. If you ever want to see kind of a science fiction version of a flexible display, find a movie called Red Planet. It stars, I have just completely blanked on who it stars, Val Kilmer. And at one point they crash land on Mars. This one guy holds this tube and he kind of pulls out like a scroll, and it's this thin sheet of plastic. And on it is full motion video, and and then he kind of rolls it back up again when he's all done. That technology basically exists, and this is kind of a very low-tech version of it. Okay, so let me take you to the next stage of this. This is the Plastic Logic Paper Tab. Okay, this was displayed at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January of 2003. This is a full-blown tablet computer on a flexible display. Okay, so imagine if your iPad could be just kind of rolled up. Okay, now you can tell it's so prototype because of the big giant wires running out of the bottom of it. Okay, but this is that e-paper display. It is touch screen. I believe if you try really hard, Julianne, you can kind of kink it or crease it, but I think you really have to work at it to do that. Through normal use, it probably shouldn't have. Yeah, okay. Helena's been at this a little too long. And now what's really cool, there's a video of this. If you find the video of this, it's really great because what you can then do with these 4 that you see here on the screen is you can set them next to each other in a grid, and they turn into one big screen. Or you could take that picture and kind of flick your finger, and it would go from that screen he's holding to the screen off to the left. Okay, these screens actually independently interacted with each other. Okay, that's just phenomenally weird. Okay? And so foldable computers. So imagine taking something like this, and instead of setting up a monitor on your desk, just sticking it to your wall. Okay, that's really what we're talking about when it comes to this stuff. Okay, 3 more slides. Sony Digital Paper. This came out in May. This is only being tested right now in Japanese universities. It is using that flexible display, so it's super thin. It's a 13.3-inch screen. It's got that stylus on the side, so you do need to use the stylus on it for like note-taking. But this is mainly marketed at the educational market. So super thin, super light, bigger screen. Yeah, as Anika says, nice real estate. Yeah, I'd love to get my hands on one of these. But then also notice that last bullet point, shared document editing over Wi-Fi was planned for this. So imagine a group of students working on a document and being able to write right on this. I think I would love to see something come of this. I'd love to see this hit the States. I think I would save my pennies and maybe, you know, $300-400. I think I'd jump on one of these just to be able to play with it. Okay, so what might actually be coming in 2014? I'm going to kind of make a couple of predictions / I'm reading the tea leaves a little bit. These have actually been prototyped, e-ink smartphone covers. So the idea is that you would add a cover to your device, to your smartphone, but the cover is e-ink. And it's that super flexible, super light material, so you can bang it into it, you can drop it, it's not going to break, but then you can get kind of constant data display on the outside of your device's case instead of having to open up the case or use a lot of extra battery life. I think this has a lot of possibilities. I don't know that it's going to work with any particular phones. I don't know who's coming out with one. It's just something that people have started talking about and prototyping and so forth. Natalie's asking, will it make for better battery life? Yes and no. If, for example, you had to turn on your phone and turn on the LCD screen to see the time and the weather versus having the e-ink display update every 15 minutes, or at least in the case of the time, every 1 minute, yes, that would use less battery life. But having this cover will still impact your battery life, just not as much as turning your phone on. Okay? So as Brock says, kind of depends on how you use your phone. Exactly. All right, last thing, and if this doesn't happen, I'll eat my hat or something. I'm going to predict that in 2014, a color e-ink Kindle is going to come out. If for no other reason than May of 2013, Amazon purchased a company called LiquiVista from Samsung, and LiquiVista makes color e-ink displays. Okay? So, and it's Samsung, not Samsung. Yes, okay, there you go. Thank you, Margaret. I've got another typo in my slides. I have been using these slides for about 2 years, and nobody's noticed these typos until now. Great. So, anyways, so I'm thinking that that's going to happen. If not in 2014, I couldn't see why not. They've bought the company. They've got the technology. Amazon owns them. Why else would they buy a company that makes color e-ink displays than to actually make a color e-ink e-reader? So if you really like that Actaco, just hold out for a little bit, and possibly in the next 8 to 12 months we'll see something from Amazon. So with that, that is 45 minutes of our hour. I kind of breezed through that, but here is my contact information. The Delicious link there, delicious.com/travellibrarian/ebooks, that are all the bookmarks for the things that I talked about in this presentation and lots of other stuff. Anything I bookmark about ebooks generally goes there. So if you are not wanting to Google things individually, chances are that you can find them there. Where are the holo novels for Star Trek, Danny asks. Don't know. We haven't gotten there yet. But I have seen some very interesting technologies with heads-up 3D displays and virtual reality stuff. Maybe I can give that presentation for the 2015 conference. So with that, officially, I'm done, but I would like to open it up for questions if you have any. I know I've been able to mostly keep up with them as they've been coming through, but if you've got any others or want to mention things, I'll be happy to do that. So Natalie is asking, why do I think that e-reading on a cell phone is more popular in some countries than others, in particular Japan? My understanding, at least when it comes to Japan, is it's really kind of a space issue. People want one small device that kind of does everything. They have a very large population, very generally compared to the U.S., smaller living spaces, things like that. So they've kind of always gone for these smaller, more compact devices. So and then Brock is saying Japan and India also have very cheap phones that can do a lot. I'm sure that would definitely influence it also. Allie is asking, any opinions to share on the Nook HD versus Kindle Fire HD? Not specifically. Basically, the best I can say is that, are you a Barnes & Noble person or an Amazon person? And any sort of which is better question, I always usually respond back with lots of questions. For example, librarians will call me and say, look, we're thinking of buying some devices for the library. What should we get? And a lot of times, if they have a Barnes & Noble in town, I generally say, you know what, you're going to get the support of the Barnes & Noble in town, so you may really want to look at it that way. My parents ended up buying an iPad. I'm not the biggest Apple fan in the world, but they have an Apple store in town, so they don't call me. So there you go. Ruth Lynn saying, what about just having the Kindle app on your Surface Pro? Yeah, I mean, if you're in the Amazon environment, you can just pretty much install a Kindle app on everything and have things completely across the board. Personally, I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but I'm generally more of an open sourcey sort of person. I try not to lock myself into a particular platform, hence the rooting of my Nook so that I can do anything I want with it. So as much as Amazon gets tons of my money and probably delivers a couple boxes a week, I am probably not ever going to spend my money on a Kindle because I don't want to be locked into their platform. But that's just me. I will not hold that against anybody or expect them to follow my political views when it comes to that. So let's see here. Looks like you're asking some questions of each other that I have no opinion on. So I will let that conversation just happen. Any other questions for me? If you want to, if you've got a microphone, feel free to raise your hand and I will happily turn on your microphone for you. I think I have the ability to do that.
Michael, I would just like to, this is Margaret, and I would like to promote to everyone that you actually do a tech talk with the Nebraska Library Commission. I think that's every Friday. Is that correct?
Close. We, at the Nebraska Library Commission, we do a weekly webinar called Encompass Live. It is Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Central Time. It is available to anybody who wants to attend. We have 1,000 seats, so please sign up for it. The easiest thing to do would be to Google Encompass Live, and it's spelled a little weird, so I will put that into the chat there. Just Google that, and it'll come right up. Topics vary from week to week. Sometimes they're Nebraska specific, sometimes not. They're always related to libraries, and then once a month, typically the last Wednesday of the month, but not always, I do a Tech Talk episode where we get a little geekier, and I generally bring in somebody to interview or talk about some tech-related topics. So we're always looking for speakers, and we're always looking for people to attend. What time is that again? It is 10 a.m. Central Time. So we're in the Central Time Zone here in the U.S. I don't know what that is in UTC off the top of my head, sorry. But like I said, if you Google Encompass Live there, it'll be the first thing that comes up, and I think the schedule for at least the next 4 to 6 weeks is up there. So feel free to participate in that if you like. And Margaret, thank you for bringing it up. So we've still got a little time here. Any other questions? Like I said, I can turn on your microphone if you'd like me to, or you can type them into the chat room. Julianne, if you had a question, I might have missed it as everything was scrolling by. An opinion on the bring your own device conversations in libraries. Considering I bring my own device to work all the time, I'm really mixed on this one. If I'm way off base on where your question was coming from, let me know. Having been a tech person and having been technical support, I completely feel the pain that is an IT department trying to deal with everybody bringing in their own devices. However, if you look historically, I found a lot of advances in technology in an office has been from people bringing in a device that the business or company or whatever didn't already have, and then eventually it got accepted. So I think kind of from my point of view, keep bringing your own stuff and keep making the IPT people deal with it. They'll figure it out eventually, and they won't figure it out if you don't bring your own stuff. So,
Yes, this is Margaret. I think Michael froze. I don't know if we lost him entirely, but he's definitely got some lag time and not moving. So thank you all for attending. There are more sessions coming in a few minutes. So if you would please close this window so that this can go to the recording server, and we'll be all good. Thank you again for your attention.